go. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the first ever author interview for the month of July. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us today is an author making her official debut here on the show. Now, my guest today is a British author who is the creator of the young adult horror series Base Fear. The final book in the series is scheduled for release sometime this year, and her flash fiction and short stories have also appeared in a range of anthologies and publishers such as Voices from Mausoleum. I'm probably butchering that. I apologize. Infested Publishing and Crystal Lake. And she currently resides in beautiful Suffolk with her family. So without further ado, let's give a huge round of applause to the twisted author of this incredible young adult series, author S.C. Fisher, otherwise known as Samantha Fisher. Samantha, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Awesome, Samantha. I'm so excited to have you here. Now, before we dive into your young adult series, is there anything you would like to add to your background? Anything you'd like to share with our viewers and listeners?
I think you covered it really well, to be honest. So yeah, the Base Fear series, if you've read it, that's me. And we've got the one more book to go, which is already written. It's in editing. We're waiting on cover design. And so I'm just an annoying little whispering voice in my publisher's ear now saying, when's it ready?
Awesome. And speaking of your series, Base Fear, what can you tell us of the series up to the next book scheduled in the series?
Okay, so books 1 and 2 are set at an RAF base, so Royal Air Force Base in North Wales. Books 3 and 4 are actually set on a US military base here in Suffolk. And books 5 and 6 are set on an army base in Germany, which isn't to say that the books are strictly about the military as in the serving person. They're more about the military families. So I suppose the little factor that ties them all together here is that they're set in real military bases. And each one of these real military bases has their own urban legend or ghost story or myth, which I've then elaborated on. And our central characters tend to be military teenagers, so the children of serving military personnel.
All right.
Books 5 and 6 are slightly different in the fact that the main character, she's around 21, but she is a young, very new military wife.
Ah, okay. All right. Nice. And is it safe to say that these books, what's the way to put it, they exist in the same universe, but they're their own separate stories?
Yes, absolutely. So 1 and 2, they are the story of the Daniels family. 3 and 4 are about sisters, Olivia and Becca Sibley.
Okay.
And books 5 and 6 are about Leanne Watt. So the stories are kind of broken down a little bit to make the books novella length.
Okay. And is it safe to say that there may be possible references to the previous books? And let's say if you read 3 and 4, maybe some references to books 2 and 1?
So the way I tried to do it was these books stand on their own. So if you had a particular interest in a US military base and you thought, 3 and 4, they sound interesting, I'll read those. But then you weren't as interested in reading about a Welsh military base, you didn't necessarily have to read 1 and 2 as well. So you can
all right.
Each of the 2 books you can take and you can read them on your own, or you can binge the entire series. But there is a tiny little Easter egg within each book that hints as to what the next book is about.
Ooh, all right. I like it. So before we further dive into the creation of Base Fear, let's talk a little bit more about you, Samantha, as the creative mind behind it. So from your description, from your bio, you've been writing for a very long time, and you've been published in numerous publications. So I'm very curious, how did that creative spark come about? Was it from a teacher, family member, or were you naturally a creative person growing up?
I think I was just always one of those children who found it very difficult to make friends. When I did make friends, I then found it hard to keep those friends, and I just never completely fit in anywhere. And so I naturally became a dreamer, because if you're spending a lot of time on your own, then you have to occupy your mind somehow. And so I was the child that quite often wandered the playground completely lost in their own world, footballs flying towards their face, not even noticing, because I'm there thinking up stories in my head. So it was just something that, even from being quite young, I always liked to be in my own head and making up my own little stories.
All right, all right. And as you grew up, what would you consider your definitive aha moment where you realize that you want to take those stories that you've had in your head and not only write them down, but to possibly build a career off of it?
So when I had just started high school, I was about 12. We don't tend to do middle school here in the UK. So you go straight from primary school, which is your elementary, right into high school. So I was around 12. I was in the first year of high school, and I was put into a program for children who performed well academically. And we had a really lovely teacher, and she would take all of us, I think, for about an hour a week, and she would try and do various things with us. She'd, try and tap into creativity with us. She would do computer science, all these things that we wouldn't have gotten necessarily from the normal curriculum. Ooh. And this one day, she discovered this competition with the Times Educational Supplement, which is quite a well-known British education publication. And it was an international competition, and children had to write an autobiographical piece of writing. And then they were judged by, I think, 2 professional writers and then a small panel of teaching professionals. Ooh, and so she entered every single one of us who was in this class, and I won. I was one of the winners. I think there were 10 international winners, and I was very fortunate to be one of the 10. And I had a nice trip to London. I went to the Globe Theatre and saw a Shakespeare production. I had a certificate presented to me by these writers, one of whom was Michael Rosen.
Ooh, okay.
And it was just probably one of the most amazing experiences I had as a child or a young person. And I just thought, I want to do this. I want more of this. I loved that I had written something that people were genuinely interested in. It felt like I had something to say.
Absolutely. And that kind of parallels with another guest who went through a very similar thing. And that's honestly very, very incredible that was like, the moment you realize that, I really want to do this, because it was that sort of not nostalgia, but there's a word that I remember in university, which is numinous. It's a feeling that you can't describe, but when you get it, it's just so addicting that you don't ever want to give it up. And it seems to me that that's what happened with you, Samantha, that you felt that incredible glee when you saw what you had accomplished. And it's like, I want to continue this and always be in this state of positivity and just showcasing my creativity, which again is amazing. And on the topic of creativity, let's now dive into the behind the scenes of a sphere. So let's start with the first book in your series. So when you began writing the first book, and of course, as you mentioned earlier, that while there are 5-6 books in the series, they're their own separate stories, but they still follow kind of the same base, where it's like there is a common folklore that each of the stories explore. So when you began writing out the outline for book 1, What were the goals you had for yourself as the author, as well as your promise to your future readers?
So I think the most important goal was just to finish the book.
Right.
I have 4 children, and I at that point was also working in a part-time job. We were actually based in North Wales at the base that book 1 was set in, book 1 and 2. And I had tried to start various books, various stories when the children were quite a bit younger, and just found that I didn't have the time. They needed too much attention from me, and that was the priority, because that is your priority as a parent. And so I felt that we'd gotten to a point with the children where they were all a little bit older, a little bit more self-sufficient. They were happy to play on their own. They didn't always need to run to ask mum for something. And I thought, well, okay, this could be the perfect time to start something just with the aim of finishing it. So I didn't even necessarily have the aim of publishing it. It was just that desire that I need to start one and I need to finish it. And then I proved to myself that I can do this, because as any writer will tell you, that actually is the hardest battle, starting something and then sticking with it until the end.
That is very, very true. And it is especially tough, especially if it's like your first book, and finding the time to be consistent. And every writer has their own routine, their own ritual of when they write and for how long. For me, I'm kind of a night owl, mostly when it comes to writing. I write at like 7 in the evening, and I probably don't stop until like maybe 12:30 in the morning. I probably shouldn't stay up that late writing because my eyes hurt. But when you're in the zone, when you're in that creative flow, you just want to write. Even if it's not your best, you still want to get the idea down on paper, which is ultimately, among the many things, a major step to achieve during the initial stage of that writing. And as a fun question, Samantha, would you consider yourself a pantser or a plotter when it comes to your stories?
Absolutely a plotter. I'm a complete control freak. So I plan to the most minute details most of the time. I know what my characters look like. If it's necessary, I'll assign them a birthday. So I like to plot. Very occasionally, I will find that I have plotted something and I will be writing and I'll think, this moment's coming up now. This is what's going to happen. And I'll realize, actually, it would be better if I did something else. So I'm quite happy once my plot's there, if I start to think that I could tweak it and improve upon it, I'm more than happy to do that. But I do at least like to have the skeleton of what I'm going to work with.
Absolutely. Same here. I like having an outline to follow. I do occasionally go off the outline if, as you said, what I wrote probably doesn't make sense or doesn't fit right with the story. One of my works in progress that I'm working on, which will technically be the next book published after my 4th one, spoiler alert for all of my viewers, is like the first few, I want to say, chapters of on the outline, like in the writing of the story, it's like 400 pages. And I've also kind of made decisions like, there's no way I'm going to write this whole book, which I'm going to date it here, viewers and listeners, so I can go back to it. I'm going to guarantee that my 5th book, which is titled as The Failed Quest, will be 1,000 pages because it's already at 400 pages.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm going to split it up into like 3 books into a trilogy because that's where I feel.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
It's going.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Sometimes readers, we all struggle to find the time to read, don't we, as well as write.
Yes.
And so sometimes you need to have those bite-sized books that people can slip into their bag or their briefcase. They can read them on the train when they're going to work. They can read a few pages on their lunch break. Reading's definitely something now I think more and more people have to actually work hard to find the time for.
Absolutely. And as a fun little question, which is also a fan question, so I'm actually going to pull it up on my phone so I can make sure to get it. So this is the first question, Samantha.
Sure.
For you, how do you overcome your writer's block?
Ooh, I think sometimes it's important to just step away from the page. There is an expression that you can't edit an empty page, but you can edit a bad page, which is very true. But sometimes you do reach the heights of writer's block where literally nothing is coming. There are no words, or you may write the same sentence in different ways about 20 times. And I think once you've gotten to that point, stepping away is a good thing to do. Going and doing something completely unrelated to writing. Go and watch a TV show, read a book, go for a walk. I'm a gamer, go and play some games. And I do find music is quite inspirational for me. It's a big part of my writing process. So sometimes trying to build yourself a little playlist that fits in with the theme and the genre of your book, that can be incredibly helpful as well.
Absolutely, Samantha. And another fan question. This is a two-parter. How do you develop your main characters in your story, and also how would you handle sensory elements, or sorry, how do you handle sensory elements when it comes to your writing?
Okay, so in terms of character development, I actually think that is one of the most important parts of a book, to some extent more important than the plot itself. Because if your character hasn't changed in some way from the beginning of your story to the end of your story, then it's been a pointless journey.
Right.
They should be different in some way. Whether they are different for the better or for the worst is the writer's decision. But in some way, they should be different. And so that is very much something that I write with a focus on. So with books 5 and 6 of Base Fear, my main character, Leanne, she starts off in a very, very bad place in the 5th book. She's had some trauma and she's running away almost from these things that have happened to her. And at times, she's not a very pleasant character. She has a lovely, wonderful husband, but she lashes out, and you see his patience. But for me, that was important then, by the end of book 6, that she had to realize, well, I do have this lovely husband. He's kind and he's supportive and he is trying his best for me. He's putting up with things that not everybody would put up with. And even if you can't wave a magical wand and go, oh, she's recovered now, she's much nicer, she's over her grief, she's over her trauma, it's that recognition of, I don't think I've actually been the nicest person up until this point. So yeah, character development for me is incredibly important.
Awesome. And the follow-up to that is, which I think is also very important, is, and I'm actually going to combine another fan question into this because I think it actually makes sense, is when, as you just mentioned, the characters are important. The main characters and the side characters are very important. What I also think is very important is the atmosphere and the sensory details that the reader is going to experience when they read the story. So how do you first create a compelling and very engaging atmosphere in your books? And how much emphasis do you put on the sensory elements of your story so that way it feels organic and authentic to the stories that you are trying to tell?
I remember helping my children learn when they were younger how to write stories. And one of the things that I would do with them is I would talk about the five senses and how you had to appeal to the five senses. And here's your character. So what are they seeing? What are they hearing? What are they feeling? You know, can they taste something even? And just tapping into that and letting them know how important that was. When you do that with a young child, obviously you're trying to get them to develop the habit of dialing into the senses. As you yourself as a writer get older, you have to make sure that you balance that and that you're not constantly talking about what the character sees, hears, tastes. It can become too much. So it's okay to pick a few and really focus on those. And senses, they're, especially for a genre like horror, which is what I write in, incredibly important, because the only thing that may be going on is the creepy noise.
Yes.
That could be your main focus of a chapter, perhaps this strange noise that your character is hearing that's unnerving them. And you have to be able to explain how and why.
Yes.
So for me, definitely focusing on the senses, definitely important, but not too much. We don't need too much information, because it's also good to let the reader imagine some things for themselves. Sometimes with horror, what my reader can imagine might be far more terrifying for them personally than anything I can tell them.
Absolutely. And that kind of goes along with, you know, when it comes to like other media with like monsters and like horror films, what's the scariest thing about them is the fact you either hear them, but you don't necessarily see them. And I think the best example of that is Jaws. Everyone says that you just hear the music. It's just so terrifying. And even if you look at the shark now, you can tell that the robotics are decent, they're okay. But at the time, it was still terrifying. And why Jaws still holds up today as not just a blockbuster movie, but like a true horror film. You don't have to see the whole shark. You just have to hear the music, and you just have to see the fin. And you can easily know what's going to happen. And as you said, Samantha, I think that's probably the most important thing for horror writers, is that you want to give just enough to get the mind going for the reader, but you don't want to spoil it by like saying what exactly the monster is or what's happening. And, you know, when we write these kind of things, it's like, oh, this is really good, I want to share it with people. But then we're at that point, it's like, well, do we share it, or do we want the reactions to be genuine? So follow up to that, Samantha, at what point in your writer's journey did you tell family and friends that you were working on these series of books? And what has been the overall reaction like from not just them, but also your readers that you've got and gathered over the years?
So I think I told maybe 3 or 4 people that I was writing the first 2 books. And as I say, my quest there was just to finish them. So I didn't necessarily think I'd be able to do anything with it. And so it was a conversation piece. Oh yeah, I'm doing this. I just want to see if I can finish. Of course, once I then realized I had finished it, and to a standard where somebody was interested in publishing it, I told everybody who would stand still long enough to hear it, basically. It was an intense moment of pride for me that I'd done it. And, you know, not necessarily a New York Times bestseller, I've done it kind of feeling, but just I've done what I set out to do and then exceeded that expectation a little bit as well.
Absolutely. And I think that kind of leads into the follow-up question, which is the first of many reflective questions, which is, as authors, especially in the digital age, there is that hesitancy to promote our work on social media, even though social media is a huge tool for not just authors, but editors, narrators, and cover artists. But especially with social media, it's a double-edged sword. On one side, we're able to connect with our readers, connect with our fans, and network, which is something that we will be talking about in the business portion of the interview. But on the other side, we unfortunately do leave ourselves exposed to a lot of negativity, hate speech, trolls, spam. And that can be very detrimental to an author's mental health and their mentality, because among many things, writing a book is a very lonely process and feeling, because it's just us. Unless you're working with a friend and collaborating on the book, then it's a little bit different. But if it's a one-person journey, which most of the time it is, it can be a very lonely feeling, and a lot of built-up anxiety can, swell up in us of, is the book going to be good? Are people going to like it? Are people going to treat us with respect or even take us seriously in this genre, especially if you've been known for writing in one style of storytelling and cross-genring into another? All of that can be sometimes too much. So for you, Samantha, throughout your journey, have you ever had those moments of heightened anxiety and maybe imposter syndrome? And if so, or if not, what has disciplined you to write this series? Because it's one thing to write a book in of itself, because that's a huge achievement on its own. It's another thing entirely to say, I'm going to write more books in this series and showcase the world that I am trying to tell.
Well, as you say, writing anything, it's actually a really vulnerable experience. You are putting your inner thoughts and feelings often down onto paper and then saying to the world, here you go, this is how my mind works. Come and have a look. And as you rightly say, the reception isn't always brilliant. There will always be people who will tell you very bluntly that they don't like what you've done, whether that might be that they don't like your genre, or they don't like your storyline, or they just don't like your writing. And sometimes they just don't like you.
Yes.
And it's one of those things that anyone who knows me personally knows I'm probably one of the most anxious people you'll ever meet. And I still have my moments now of thinking, oh, this isn't good enough. I'm not good enough. I haven't sold well enough. I'm not doing enough on social media, or conversely, I'm doing too much on social media. I'm annoying people. And at some point, you have to be really firm with yourself and just say, okay, stop. Do you want this? Yes, I do. Then you have to, within reason, do whatever it takes to get it.
Yes.
And often that is just to keep trying. Because if you never try, then you won't succeed.
Absolutely. That is very true, Samantha. That is very true. And a follow-up to that, which I think is really important to talk about, and one of probably my favorite questions to ask on the show as of late, is this notion of whether we as authors are in a golden age. And the reason I bring this up, Samantha, is that there's been a discussion within the community, or at least in my inner circle of authors, is that within the last 4 years, since the COVID years, there's been an influx of independent writers. And a lot of people argue that during the lockdown years, the COVID years, that pushed people to, branch out and create new things, especially if you're in that creative flow. So you have a lot more independent authors. You have a lot more artists. You have people who made their own businesses, like editing services.
Yes.
And then you also have new musicians, and then you have content creation, all of that. And so there has been this debate of whether or not the COVID years launched a golden age of authors. Some say that we are in a golden age, or at least a renaissance. And some have even argued that we are not in either one, because while there is an influx of new books, a lot of these books were not created with the idea of passion behind them. They were solely created just to exist in the void. So for you, Samantha, in your opinion, do you believe that we are in a golden age, or at least possibly entering a renaissance?
I can see all sides of this argument, if I'm completely honest.
Okay.
I do agree that the extra time that a lot of people who were on furlough had during COVID did help them to tap into their more creative sides. I don't necessarily think anybody thought they were going to get rich quick off that.
No.
I don't think anybody creates art with the idea of becoming a millionaire. I think most of us know that's not how it works. And I don't really see any harm in people finding that artistic joy in life, because the world can be a really ugly and brutal place. So if you are adding beauty to it, there's no harm in that whatsoever. On the other hand, I would say that we do have an advantage in terms of the tools that are now available to us to make it easier to self-publish. If we think of someone who's considered as one of the greats, if we think of Stephen King, back in his day, you very much typed things up on typewriters and then you sent a giant manuscript off through the post, and then you were potentially waiting 6 months to a year to hear anything back, which I'm such an impatient person that sometimes waiting 3 weeks on an anthology call pains me physically. So I can't imagine that kind of feeling, and how much self-doubt authors who basically had to make it that way, how much self-doubt they must have experienced in those torturous waits, and then potentially to wait a year and then to have a letter that simply said no thank you arrive on your doormat. So we're lucky in terms of we can access self-publishing a lot more easily now as writers. But then there are so many other factors to consider as well. There's been a large Amazon boycott. So I know that has hurt sales for a lot of people. And whilst I completely believe anyone is entitled to spend their money where they want, where they can live with where they're spending it, it would be silly to say that it hadn't hurt sales, and that doesn't then have a knock-on effect on independent authors or authors published with small presses. So I think it's actually a very mixed bag. We might have more people now willing to make themselves vulnerable to create and then share, and they may have more tools available to them to do so, but I don't necessarily think that means that they're going to be embraced by the reading public any more than they would have been 20, 30 years ago.
Absolutely. And I think another thing to talk about, which also has contributed to, the influx of new authors. I'm not saying all authors are guilty of this, but there have been some authors, and they have been showcased, not on the show, but in social media and the world, is the rise of artificial intelligence in the publishing industry. And it comes to narration, writing books, editing, and stuff like that. And probably the one that's been the most popular recently is a book that was on Amazon, and one of the pages actually said this book was written in the style of so-and-so, and I was like, oh no, why did you keep that in there? It's just, it's very unfortunate, because I can see, and I've been the first to say this on numerous shows, I have used AI, like Grammarly, to help with, editing just simple words that I typically write. Like, I write all my own stories, but I will never use it to, like, write a whole chapter or stuff like that. And I've used other softwares to help with, cleaning up my outlines and maybe help cleaning up my characters, so that way their introductions are a little bit more fluid and stuff like that. I will be the first to admit that. But when it comes to writing the story, that's all me. Because it is, as you said, a vulnerable state to create something entirely original on your own. And it's a lot of work. It's very, very stressful. So, Samantha, what are your thoughts on the AI controversy in the publishing world?
It's funny you should ask me this, because I have actually this afternoon just been to see Megan 2.0, which is very topical for the AI debate. And I won't spoil the film for anybody who wants to go and see it. I enjoyed it. Very good film, very funny, some laugh out loud moments. But the message that they seem to be trying to convey to their audience was that AI can have its place in society. It can be incredibly helpful when we think about things like pioneering medical technologies that will save lives. That's such a good use of AI, and I don't really think anyone could argue against something like that. Whereas we have other uses that are maybe not so good. I personally want AI to serve me in a way that frees me up to do more creative things. I don't want to say to AI, oh, will you go and do the creative thing for me, and then I'll go and log 8 more hours at the day job. To me, that's not fun. That's no. So I think as well, it's a very different animal to use any kind of spelling, grammar, punctuation AI tool. You know, everybody uses spell check, for example. Yes. Who doesn't? So that's a very different thing to somebody typing in, oh, hey, I want to write a book in this genre, and this is the character, and this is the character. Now you go off and you write me the entire book, please, AI. And I have to say, to me, that kind of behavior it's a cheat. It is a cheat.
Absolutely.
And it's not something that you could ever accuse somebody like Tolkien or King or John Grisham. You couldn't accuse them of doing that type of thing. The technology wasn't available. Everything came from them. And I think it would be a really, really sad world if we use robotics to make art rather than for the other things, the important things that they are completely capable of doing.
Absolutely. And I think this perfectly segues into the business side of being an author, because there's a lot of discussions on the business portions. So this is another two-parter, Samantha, and one of them is going to be another fan question. So the first question is, when you finished the first book in your series, how much research did you look into to figure out what publishing direction was the best for you? And the fan question is, did you face any unexpected challenges while publishing your first book and the books after?
So I was, as I say, very, very new to publishing at that point. I had done a few online competitions with Crystal Lake. So I knew of them, but at that time they didn't have open submissions, and at that point they didn't publish young adults anyway. So that immediately, what I was familiar with, that was an avenue that was closed at once.
All right.
So it was a lot of researching online, trying to find publishers that would consider an unagented debut writer. I did manage to find a few. Obviously, had some rejections before, I in the end received an acceptance. So yeah, that is never the easiest part of the journey, is sending the queries in, especially when you're completely new to it. You don't know if you're writing your cover letter correctly. You don't know when they say, oh, we need a synopsis, spoil the book for us. You're like, well, how much do you want me to spoil this book? And as it turns out, completely. They want you to spoil it completely, tell them everything. So it's that in itself, I think, was the challenge. Knowing how to approach people who, some of whom have been in the industry for many, many years, were very experienced, very clever people, and not wanting to come off like a complete bumbling idiot by just shooting them a quick email. I've got this book I've written. Do you want to look at it?
All right. And as also an add-on to that, what would you say is probably the most surprising part of the publishing journey that you found?
Ooh, the most surprising part. Probably how much marketing is involved that falls on your own shoulders. I don't think I quite realized that once I'd taken off the writer hat and I'd taken off the editor hat and then passed the work over and they went, oh, okay, yes, we like this, I would then have to put the marketing hat on.
Yes.
And that's a really steep learning curve, because some things can work phenomenally well. You can have one TikTok video that suddenly goes viral, and then immediately your book hits #1 in Amazon. Or you can post in 50 Facebook groups and not get a single like.
And that's also true.
Yeah, it's again, that's one of the harder parts, is the marketing. It's something I've gotten better with, something I enjoy slightly more now, trying to come up with more creative ways. You know, I've tried it this way. What if I did this? Or, you know, are people excited if I do this thing here? So I've gotten better, but I was definitely unprepared for the level of self-marketing that goes into publishing a book.
Yeah, that's probably the most challenging thing among many things, is the marketing aspect. I still struggle with marketing even now after writing 3 books and now working on finishing my 4th book, which is going to go into beta reading hopefully soon. And one thing I've learned throughout all of my books is that once you go into the marketing phase, the first thing to consider, well, it should be the first things you consider during the writing phase, is understanding and knowing your audience.
Yes.
That is a very true thing. Now, of course, the audience could change over time. Absolutely. It's an ever-changing entity. But it also begs the question of what type of audience, or the audience itself, who exactly are you writing for? Because there's the market audience that's usually tied to the genre that you're writing for. But then there's also the readership audience, people like yourself who enjoy books like these. You want to market to them.
Yes.
And it's kind of like, which one is the better one? Which one am I going to get the most responsive feedback? So for you, Samantha, another 2-part question. Did you have a good idea of your audience when you began writing the first book and then up to your most recent? And would you consider yourself an author who writes to the target audience or the target readership for your books?
Oh, good question. So one of the driving factors actually in me writing the first 2 books was that I wanted to see a series of books that my own children could see themselves reflected in. They were coming up to the ages of reading young adult fiction.
Right.
And you see a very diverse range of characters now in young adult fiction, which is brilliant because everybody likes to see themselves reflected in pages or on the screen.
Yes.
But I didn't see any military children. Maybe I didn't look hard enough, but we couldn't find any. And for children who their childhoods, their adolescence revolve around a unique set of problems and issues that comes with being a military child. So the constant moving, needing to be very good at making friends, dealing with a parent being off on deployment, potentially in a war zone. The fact that living on a base, it's completely different to living in a normal neighborhood. I just thought, well, it would be nice for my kids to be able to read something where they see a character who actually understands what they're going through and who is going through the same thing as them.
Absolutely.
So I had this very strong, clear idea that I wanted to write for young adults in this instance, and that I wanted it to be either young adults who know what this feels like, or young adults who actually are just curious about what that feels like. Because I do think young adult readers have an amazing sense of curiosity, and that's why they're readers. They like to learn about the different walks of life that people come from. and they like to understand these things. So
Absolutely.
that was very important to me.
And this also kind of goes into, a lot of my guests, who especially our parents, have said the exact same thing. Samantha was there. When they were writing their books, they wanted to be books that they would feel comfortable giving to their children that they can read. And especially if it's YA, that's also a very interesting category to write in. The reason why I say interesting is that, well, at least that I've seen in the YA, there are some books that borderline in NA or AF, depending on the themes. And it's like, okay, this definitely needed a rewrite, because each category has its own set of rules and expectations that not only affect the author, but also give an idea to the reader. And of course, some books are going to change one way or the other. As we've mentioned, the audience could very well change, but also the story could change. I've had one author on the show who said that their YA book transformed into an NA, which is new adult, and sometimes an AF. And I think it is really important to understand that and really dig into, am I going to write an entirely different book in the sense of the audience, or am I going to stick to my guns and write the book that I want to write? So for you, Samantha, at any point in your journey, did that ever come across in your writing as you were developing your stories?
I did have a couple of people who I'd mentioned that I was writing to say, oh, well, it's a harder sell with young adults. It's harder to break into, which seems to be the perception. It didn't necessarily alter my decision that that's what I was going to write and that's who I was going to write for, because as I say, initially when I started, the goal was finish the book, and also turn out a book that would appeal to my children who would be of that age.
Right.
So I generally, from the people who fall into the young adult age bracket who have read it, the feedback's been really good. They've been very keen. Quite a few of them asking when's the next book. So I do know people adults who have read the books and also enjoyed them, especially anyone who is associated with the military. Had a few military wives comment and say that actually they felt, even though these were adolescent characters, they felt very seen by these issues and by the thought processes of the characters. So I wouldn't necessarily say that I let anyone or anything put me off what I had decided, which was that this would be young adult.
Yes, that is very true. And I think another thing which is important to really talk about is understanding the kinds of stories that we want to write, which all boils down to the kind of author we want to be. And this balancing act of our voice, our individuality, realizing and understanding the genres that we're writing in. Because I've talked about this on the show a lot, and there is a connection, because readers do have an expectation when it comes to certain stories, because every story has been told numerous times over. And as authors, we've been told the same line, write the story that you want to write. Absolutely. But also be conscious of the story itself. What I mean by that, don't make it too original that it's going to throw off your readership. But don't make it so familiar in the sense that it's a literal copy and paste of a story that exists. Take an element, take a piece of it or a story device and give it your own spin. And I think what helps with that is networking, which is vital as an author.
Absolutely.
Because from networking, you're able to meet other authors, bounce off ideas, and they can give you tips and tricks of how to help develop your voice. So as another two-part question to this, Samantha, in your opinion, how important is it that networking assists in the development of an author's voice, and for you balancing your individuality and the stories that you grew up reading and the authors you've respected? And are there any people, I know you get name drop
Mm-hmm.
quite a few, but are there any specific people you'd like to give a personal shout out to who have helped you sort of find your voice as an author?
So as you say, networking is a huge part of being successful at anything, is
Yes.
surrounding yourself by people who are of a similar status in a similar community and understand what you're going through. And I don't necessarily think networking with other writers has to affect your voice as a writer or the stories that you're creating. But I think what it can do for you is not only obviously help with marketing, but it helps massively with support, just general support.
Right.
There's been times where there's authors that I'm friends with who have revealed that they're going through a rough time. There's been times that I've gone through that have been particularly rough. And when you've surrounded yourself with a community of people who are very interested in the same things and are in lots of ways similar to you, then the support that you can get from them when you're having a rough time it's incomparable, because they often know the right words to say to you to try to, even if they can't lift you out, just to keep you afloat.
Yes.
And that's completely invaluable, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Are there any specific people that have helped you develop your voice or gave you some really great advice you would like to name drop?
Yes, I recently, last year, did a collaborative anthology with a person called Harriet Everend, who is also an author. She's written a book called The Summoning and others besides. And she has her own publishing company called January Ember Press. And I had this tiny, tiny spark of an idea about collating an anthology that was purely written by survivors of sexual assault or sexual violence. And it was sparked by the meme that was going around social media of the man versus the bear. And it was the fact that people were getting so upset over it that they couldn't seem to think that, well, no, this might not apply to me personally. I'm not that type of person that it would apply to, but they couldn't put themselves into the mindset of a survivor and just try to understand why that survivor would feel that way. And that it wasn't actually saying anything about them as a person. It was an exercise in empathy, really. Try to empathize with survivors. And I didn't really know how to do it. I had this idea, I wasn't sure how to do it, and so I reached out to her, and she was like, okay, this is what we're going to do. And within 15 minutes she had an anthology call drafted up. She'd recruited somebody for cover design, and we put this book out, and all the proceeds of the book went to Take Back the Night, which is a charity that supports survivors globally. So it wasn't just specific to one area. And that wouldn't have happened without her. Maybe I planted the seed of the idea, but she watered it and nurtured the tree. Awesome. So definitely would love to give a shout out to her. Also, another lovely person who has a book coming out today called Little White Flowers is Amber Hathaway.
All right.
And she is a breath of social media fresh air. She's got a very fun Instagram profile. She dresses up. She always does a Face Friday, huge smiles. She really helps to lift people's spirits. And I could probably go on and on and on and on. What I would say is I have very scarcely interacted with somebody who I haven't felt deserves to be where they are or deserves to be supportive. I've been very lucky. I know there's been controversies, and there's been things that I've heard, unsavory things going on, but I have been so lucky that I have never been directly adjacent to or in the center of any of that.
Right. Awesome. And I think this perfectly leads into one of the final questions, or probably the final question of this incredible interview, Samantha. And I'll give some context for this one. So I've been doing this show now for about 6-7 years. And
Wow.
in that time period, I think I've interviewed almost like 140 authors on YouTube alone, which is insane. And I've learned a lot from all the authors that I've had on my show, and I've had the opportunity to meet them in person. And the one thing that I have always kept to and really shared on my platform is that in the world of publishing, being an author, there are two paths: to be an author, to be known as an author. One is dedicated to the craft, the other is dedicated to the business. They both lead to the same goal, which is status. But as we talked about in this interview, being a writer is not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Absolutely
Very
not.
lonely, very vulnerable place to
Hard
be.
work.
Yes. And the hard truth of the matter is, as an author, there is no guarantee your first book is going to be a success.
No.
And that's going to be very difficult to swallow, but it is the case. Will we all like our books to be New York Times bestsellers, Pulitzer Prize winning? Absolutely. Are there books that are the first for authors that achieve that in their first run? Absolutely so. But those are the exceptions. Not every author is going to sell 500 copies. Not every author is going to sell 100 copies, let even alone 50 copies. It only boils down to the goals that you had when you go into this industry. Do you want to be a writer that's just writing for fun, or do you want to transform that hobby and grow it as a business? So here's a little scenario, Samantha. Let's say you're at a book festival in London or somewhere in England, and you're hosting a seminar, and in that seminar is a room full of aspiring writers. Let's say you have primary school students, secondary school students, university students who want to get into the publishing industry. How would you teach that class on the lesson of, in this industry, there is no guarantee that your book is going to be a success, but you should take the hard knocks, the failures of an author, and learn from them to grow and just hone your craft as a writer?
I think I would say, if you're serious, you won't give up. And we all have the times that we feel like we want to give up, or even that we should give up. But if you are truly serious about this, if this is something that you think about from the moment that you wake up in the morning to the moment that you go to bed at night, creating stories and writing and making people feel something through your words, then you won't ever truly give up. Whether you have 5 acceptances in one day or whether you have 50 rejections in one day. It's okay. It's okay to feel that. It's okay to have your low moment and to pour yourself a big glass of wine and eat a family-sized bar of chocolates. But there comes a point where you then have to take a deep breath and you have to have a stern word with yourself and say, if I want this as much as I claim I want this, I'm going to keep going until I physically cannot keep going anymore, until the end of the line. And even then, Ouija board and ghostwriter, it's never over.
That is very, very true, Samantha. That is very true. And before we officially end this amazing interview, there is a final fan question that I want to ask you. And this is probably my favorite one that I've been saving for the very end. So out of your series, what has been your favorite scene to write that has truly struck you as an author, in the sense that, wow, I actually created that. That it was so powerful and moving that you were in disbelief that you yourself created that powerful scene.
Okay, so I would actually say it's the final chapter in the last book, book 6. And I don't want to say too much because book 6 isn't out yet. There are people who've read book 5, and I think I did a pretty good job of not leading people to guess how book 6 is going to end. But it's an incredibly emotional chapter. And the words that it ends on, I think, are quite poignant words. And they were words that, after I wrote them, actually gave me a little bit of hope about one of my greatest fears in life. So I've got my fingers crossed that when people read that, anybody who fears the same things that I fear will read that, and actually it might make them feel the same. Because at the end of the day, that's what we're writing for. We're writing to make people feel. And whether that is to make them feel happy, sad, scared, excited, that's just what we want. We want our words to have power.
Amazing, amazing. And this is a perfect ending to this incredible author interview for the beginning of July. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for an incredible episode here on the Wandering Scribe Show. I want to give a huge thank you to Samantha Fisher for making her official debut on the Wandering Scribe podcast. Samantha, thank you so much. Where can people find you on social media if they want to reach out and connect, as well as buy the first 5 books in your series?
So you can find the first 5 books in my series on Amazon. They're available in Kindle and paperback. You can find me hanging out on TikTok, where at the moment I'm trying to do a series of short videos to promote writers who are struggling, as a lot of us are. So I'm calling it my Underdogs series. So come and find me in TikTok. Help me promote that series. Let's help these people find readership. Let's help them get read. You can also find me on Instagram, where I post too many pictures of food. And you can find me on Facebook. And that's all under SC Fisher Author.
Awesome. Now for book 6, is there a pre-order link that people can pre-order for when the book does release?
Unfortunately, there is not. I can give you a title. So book 5 is called No Place Like Hona. Hona is the name of the camp. And book 6 is called Hona, Sweet Hona.
All right. So viewers and listeners, make sure to write that down and make sure to follow Samantha Fisher to stay up to date with the release of book 6. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for an amazing episode here, beginning the lineup of July. A huge thank you to Samantha Fisher. Make sure to follow her on all her social media platforms down below. And as always, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay up to date with important news coming to the show. And if you're a subscriber to my newsletter, want to give a special announcement. The Wandering Scribe will officially have a website, which will not only have links to this channel, but also be my author website, something that I've been working on for the last 3 months. Just finishing up the finer details before it goes live this week. So be on the lookout for that. I'll make sure to tag it down below. And as always, this is the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you all in the coming episodes this week. And thank you again for your love and support. We'll see you all in the next episode.